Here we go. All right, Boker Tov, everybody. Hopefully, everyone's extra rested with their extra hour of sleep. We are in the middle of chapter 9 of Shaar Hayichud. And just to take a few moments and review a little bit about what we talked about in the beginning of the chapter, and we'll pick up from there. At the end of chapter 8, the Alter Rebbe was talking about the concept of Chachma within the human being. Now, of course, if you Google the word Chachma, it simply comes up as wisdom. And as we have pointed out, Chachma, the first word of Chabad, is not wisdom in the context of saying how many pages of the Talmud we know, or how quickly we can figure out problems or recall. It is about the willingness to go outside of myself. And this is the greatest. When I say greatest, I don't mean most valuable. I mean most profound, most distinctive, most infinite gift of the human being, their capacity to go outside of their own life experience, outside of their own parameters, to be able to imagine something beyond themselves. And this is what allows us to be inventive. We use the word creative, although remember, we're always very cautious with that word because only Hashem creates. We rearrange, we take the natural products and we transform nature into art. So from our perspective, Chachma is the most profound and the most infinite, the least describable, and thus the most godlike. And this chapter begins with a very hard break. Aval, but relative to Hashem, Chachma is the power of creation, of action, of physical design, and so forth. Now, on the surface, this would seem to say it's along the lines of, oh, yeah, you think that's great? Well, for me, that's nothing. So the child comes home and they're all excited that they can do basic addition and they think they have mastered all of math. And we tell them that's the epitome of second grade. But when you come to sixth grade, you can already start to do more complicated forms of math that make that math seem like child's play. That's not the vibe that we're headed for here. Because then the downside of that would be not only is it a little bit immature, but it would still suggest that the two are in the same genre. So it is true that the PhD in mathematics is completely beyond the grasp of the basic elementary math. However, it's still both math. And if you go from second grade to third grade to postgraduate, you will eventually get there. And of course, we can never eventually evolve ourselves into the infinity of Hashem. Not just because Hashem is such a better piano player that no matter how much I practice, I'll never be good. It's because it's of a completely different character. And again, we recall that we talked about this was one of those issues that created what I call sort of the social pushback against Hasidus, because there was a discomfort with the immediacy of the description of Hashem. There were those who considered it to be too tangible, it's too knowing of it. It's like letting somebody in too personally. It's like a child and a parent where the child becomes too friendly with the parent and they could potentially lose that reverence. So they didn't like that the Alter Rebbe was making Hashem so available to just everybody. They thought that should be reserved for the people who are sort of mature enough, I'll use that word, to deal it properly with proper discretion and reverence, and not say, "Oh wow, look what I found out," and it potentially become manipulative about it. Excuse me. So the Alter Rebbe goes on to explain that when we describe, for example, the pasuk in Tillim that says, "Kulam, all things, b'chachma, with wisdom, asisa, were made," the standard interpretation of that suggests that what they call intelligent design, that everything that God made functions so seamlessly, the orbits of the sky and the distance of the sun from the earth, enough to warm the earth, but not to burn it, and not too distant as to freeze it. The way the Alter Rebbe is reading it now is that Chachma, which again we consider to be infinite and expansive, is pragmatic, tangible, and slotted into particularisms like a physical creation. just like when you take, you design something. I keep using that word creation. I'm trying to avoid it, but I keep stumbling into it. When we design an object, it has to be very precise. The engineering specs have to match up precisely, and therefore it requires a certain rigidity and a certain diminishment of infinity. Well, Chachma is seen as the opposite of that. It's the one run wild imagination that has no cap on it. But when Hashem talks about, that's from our perspective, from bottom up. When we talk about Chachma in connection with Hashem, that's also a rigidity, because Hashem is now slotted into Chachma. And any description, is the contrast, the pushback against the no thing that we have talked about so often. So when we describe Chachma as being as close as we can get to the infinity of Hashem, when we describe Chachma in relationship to Hashem, we're talking about the closest thing that Hashem gets to us, which is what makes it the perfect meeting point between the infinite and the finite, because it is infinite relative to our ordinary life experience, and yet it is finite relative to Hashem's sort of essential identity as being infinite. What then it becomes the role of the spheres? Again, we have talked about the spheres. Hopefully everyone's basically generally familiar with the concept. We will get into some of the sort of mechanics and details of it in this chapter. Herein lies the essential objective of this chapter. What then is the role? If we say that Hashem is invested in the spheres, well, then we're putting a limitation on Hashem. If we say that Hashem is not, and it's just some sort of essentially artificially created terminology to give us some language, but it's really not, so then the whole thing is just made up, which is, I'm being perhaps overly flippant about it, but conceptually that's not a bad thing, because we have to design a tool, like a metaphor and an analogy. We design tools, so there doesn't have to really be a tortoise and a hare. That's not the relevant point. The relevant point is the lesson that slow and steady wins the race. So is that what the spheres are? Are they just a sort of completely artificial a metaphor that can be discarded, or is there a reality to the spheres? So the Alter Rebbe's position is there is a reality to the spheres, which of course leads us to, well, wait. If there's a reality to the spheres, then how come we don't say that is putting a restriction on Hashem? This is essentially where we're up to. So we've addressed the Chachma level within Hashem. We've talked about what that means, and here we go. Ki inyan. Now again, it's not a chitas starting point, so it's in the middle of chapter 9. So hopefully everybody can find the spot. If somebody wants to unmute and tell us, because I know there's all the different princes. There's the Rabbi Miller, there's the old lessons in Tanya, the new lessons in Tanya, etc. But hopefully everybody can find the spot. In Hebrew, it's ki inyan hasaga. So here the Alter Rebbe is continuously describing why the term Chachma cannot be applied to Hashem, even though we think of Chachma as uppest, mostest, highest. Ki inyan hasaga, because when we talk about hasaga, now if we translate the word hasaga, we'd probably put the word grasp. Now, this is a little bit of a deliberate misleading point, because when we grasp something, we say it in English, you really understand it, you grasp it. We also say grasp when you hold something physically in your hand. You grasp the bottle, you hold it in your hand. So that's a little bit of a deliberate head fake, because we're going to touch upon that idea.
Old lessons in Tanya, it's 953 at the very bottom.
Old lessons in Tanya, 953 on the bottom. If you have the new lessons in Tanya, it's a different page, and so on. Okay. So this idea of hasaga, which I'm just going to use that word grasping, misyaches, is relevant, v'noifol, and he uses a little bit of an odd phrase here, it can fall, al davar chachma v'seichel. It can fall onto a concept of chachma, and again, chachma being more imaginative, we'll use the word infinite, or seichel. Now, seichel, the difference between chachma and seichel, although seichel seems to be a more generic term to encompass all forms of intellectual analysis, the word seichel suggests something that you really grasp. So again, the word hasaga in English, the same thing, grasp. you get it. You got it. You got what I'm talking. You got the point. Now you got the item. I pass you my pencil. You got it. You're holding the pencil. I explained the idea to you. You got it. Now you are sort of holding the idea. It is appropriate, and I think that's what the Alter Rebbe may be alluding to with this word benoifel. It sort of falls there. It's not a real precise utilization of the word because, again, we don't transfer ideas like we transfer pencils. I take the pencil, I give it to you. Now you got it. Now, when I give you, you got it, I don't got it. But of course, when I share an idea with you, you got it and I got it. There hasn't been a full transference. So it's neufel. You can use that term. We think about the different terms that we use for understanding. You see what I mean? Did you hear the point I was making? You get what I mean? These are all terms that we use almost intuitively to try to communicate the capacity to grasp an idea. And that's the key word that we're talking about here. And we'll see how the Alter Rebbe plays this out. She'ef shel hasigai, it's possible to be grasped. And again, we're deliberately using that English word. Oh, we have shel hasigai, or you can't grasp it. Why? Because it is far too deep to be grasped. So again, I can carry a pencil. I can't carry an anvil. It's too heavy. So too, an idea can be ungraspable because it's too deep. It's got too much depth to it, too much infinity to it, and I can't get my arms around it. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Hashem, and again, there's that usage, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We've talked about this many times before. Kadosh, separate, Baruch, connected. So when we use the term to refer to Hashem as HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're suggesting this bridge level. And again, that's what Chachma is. To us, Chachma is uppest, mostest, toppest, most infinite. For Hashem, it's tangible enough where he can connect with us, but he's not graspable because our primary need is to be able to have some understanding or some grasping, whether it's a physical grasping or it's a conceptual grasping. We got to have something, contrast yesterday, today, tomorrow. And Hashem's primary need is he's unknowable. So what's the possible potential meeting point is Chachma. So there can be a Chachma that I get, like I get concepts of math or reading or whatever it is. Again, we're not talking about facts. We're talking about the concepts. And there are the ones which I can't grasp. It's too much for me. I can't get it. But Hashem, who is beyond Seichel and Chachma. And again, this isn't just, well, he's so big, he's bigger than big. Again, this is underscoring the idea that Seichel and Chachma are still slots. And Hashem is not slotable. You can't put Hashem in a category. Lo shayach klal loimer boy, shiaf shel hasigai. It is not appropriate to describe Hashem as unknowable or ungettable or ungraspable. Because by describing Hashem as ungraspable, you are essentially suggesting that he could be graspable, but I can't grasp it. So the mere description of Hashem in a negative, that is, that he's not something, is suggestive that it's within that category. We just had it in the Parsha. We know the opening line of Noach 2 weeks ago. So it says, Noach was righteous in his generation. And of course, the question is, what is the modifier of in his generation? So the complementary interpretation is, even in his generation, when he had no support and everybody around him was evil, he still was righteous. Then there's the derogatory interpretation. Oh, you think he was righteous? Had he been around the time of Avraham Avinu, he wouldn't have been considered anything special. But again, the mere fact that you have to say that he's not as great as Avraham Avinu is already a compliment. Meaning, the fact that you have to point out that he did not reach the level of Avram is already suggestive that you might have thought that he was comparable to Avram. So even the negation of it, and you don't have to say that a strawberry is not a truck. because nobody would think it was. When you say that one is not like the other, you're suggesting that there is otherwise reason to believe that they are. So you can't say that Hashem can't be understood. Here's where we sometimes fall into this mistake, where we say, oh, we can't understand Hashem's genius, meaning it suggests that it's understandable. Look, I can't understand, a great scholar's genius, but great scholars can, and maybe one day we can. Just like that child in second grade will one day be the PhD in mathematics. So to say that we can't understand Hashem is to suggest that Hashem is understandable, but I can't understand him. But somewhere, at some point, we're going to get the explanation to all these questions. But again, that is thus suggesting that this term called rationale and explanation is Iber Alis, that is the supreme. And therefore, certainly Hashem is going to fit into that category. That is confining Hashem to a limited parameter called intelligence, wisdom, etc. Because Hashem is not within the category of understanding. Again, we can't even make the negative suggestion because that itself alludes to that you might have thought it was relevant. It's the ultimate trick question. And this is it's a quote from this week's parsha. Nice hashgacha pratis. You people think everything is hashgacha pratis, but Allah, and to say about Hashem, that you can't grasp him, you can't figure him out. That it would be like saying that idea is so deep that I can't fit it in my hand, which is silly because nobody suggests that an idea can be grasped in the hand. So just like that would be ridiculous. And we'll talk about that term in a second. To suggest or to even make the declaration that I can't hold that in my hand, it is equally as ridiculous to say that I can't understand Hashem. In fact, it's the ultimate sense of arrogance. I just want you to know that I'm not perfect. Oh, meaning the suggestion is that you otherwise thought that I was perfect. And the fact that I have to negate it is already the ultimate self-compliment. Shekol Hashemei Yitzchak loy. Now this you recognize, it's the parsha. Whoever hears it will laugh. When Sarah names Yitzchak, he's all surrounded with the term of laughter. We had it actually in yesterday's parsha. Hashem told Avram that he should call him Yitzchak, but Sarah is the one who calls him Yitzchak, and Sarah laughs and so on. Now here it's worth talking about at two levels. And again, we don't want to fixate on the parsha, but it becomes a nice entryway into understanding why the Alter Rebbe says it here. On the one hand, we do find in Torah in general that there is a bias towards quoting psukim. Instead of just saying something straight out, if you can find a quote from a pasuk to illustrate a concept, there is a certain bias and value in using that as a system to communicate. And this is common. You find it in the Gemara, and especially in the later, like, the Alter Rebbe, relatively recent, that this is a preferred method of expression. To always, instead of, I shouldn't say always, but instead of just saying something in a sort of vernacular, to use a pasuk or something to highlight it. And this has got a number of explanations. One is there's always a beauty to quoting Torah. We're writing Torah here, so I should always use Torah. Two, it also is suggested that, well, there's always going to be a holiness in Torah, but they can't sacrifice the clarity of the point we're trying to make. If you've ever encountered people who are accustomed to always quoting, literature, it could be clever, it could be annoying, and sometimes it doesn't express the concept as clearly as if they would just say it straight up and stop giving me, the Mark Twain. So herein, I think the Alter Rebbe is alluding to this story that we have in the parsha. We know that when Hashem told Avram that he was going to have a child, he laughed. And Sarah, who didn't hear it directly from Hashem, which is part of the explanation, she only heard it through the curtain from the people who we later learn to be angels, that she's going to have a child, so she doesn't get it directly from Hashem, she also laughs. So there's a different, the circumstance is different. So there's two aspects to laughter. One is laughter is the product of a discomfort. It's the sort of unexpected. So when you hear something that's unexpected, you laugh because it's so out of what we anticipated. But then there's another level of laughter, which is it is an unrefined, maybe, form of expression of great alignment, great pleasure. Meaning, anytime a person, let's say, gets all excited and they cheer. Why do they cheer? Because they're so overwhelmed with an emotional outburst that they cannot contain it within finite words. And therefore, it just comes out as this shapeless expression because it's too surging to be constrained and contained in particularisms. So Avram laughed because when he heard that he's going to have a child, which he heard directly from Hashem, so he had no opportunity to see anything as being a form of ridiculousness because he's hearing it directly from Hashem. And again, Sarah doesn't hear it from Hashem. She doesn't even hear it, quote, directly from the visitor. She only hears it through the curtain. So too, when we make this point that Hashem, we should not say, it is not reasonable to say that Hashem can't be grasped. We have laughter. Why would we laugh? One is because it's so ridiculous to suggest it. Why would you have to say that Hashem can't be grasped? With wisdom, it's so patently ridiculous. It's like saying you can't hold calculus in your hand. I mean, it's silly, and therefore it's. The other is because that's the point, that Hashem is infinite and like laughter can't be contained within finite units of expressed words. Like some sort of comedic robot, who makes jokes and has this sort of ironic sense of expression of total rationale, which itself is comical because there's an infinity about this expression. When Avram hears that he's going to have a child, there's an infinite aspect because of the miraculous quality, because this is his greatest aspiration, for all the reasons that we can imagine, that it has to come out as laughter because it can't be contained in words because of its infinity. So again, I think, maybe I'm just making this up, but when the Alter Rebbe quotes this pasuk, he's not just doing a search for where can I find laughter mentioned in Torah. I think he is potentially, at least, alluding to the whole story associated with this quote, which is the description of Hashem telling Avram, and then again, like I said, ultimately through Sarah, to this about this birth and that, and the response of laughter. One, because of the ridiculousness of it, and two, because it again illustrates how infinity cannot be contained in nice, neat little packages. The fee, why? So here he goes back and he sort of plays it out for us. Why is this so funny? The fee, shechush hamishush, because the capacity, the talent of mishush. Mishush means, it's like the word mamish, that's what comes from, to tangibilize, to hold something physically in your palm. Does not fit or fall. We talked about that before. You can only talk about holding something in your hand if it is physical, like the pencil. Now, we said earlier that you can say, you grasp the idea, you get what I'm talking about, like we talked about that earlier. So why is the Alter Rebbe saying that it's not applicable here? Because even the concept of pencil can be grasped, because it's again still ultimately associated with something that is categorizable, in contrast to the infinity of Hashem. And this is the point that we're trying to make, that relative to Hashem, the concept of seichel is a physical thing. Seichel is as rigid and limited to Hashem as a pencil is to us. So we think a pencil is a limited, finite entity. But the concepts of pencil are infinite. But to Hashem, the concepts are as physically dimensioned and finite as the pencil mamash. Vafilu hasagas sichliim sheba olim esalyonim vafilu madregas chacham ilah hamachayes kulam kedichsiv kulam b'chacham asis. And this is true not just on the very ordinary, routine, pedestrian concepts of very tangible pencils and very physical ideas and very simplistic ideas. And again, you think about the child as they're moving up and they're suddenly learning, hey, there are other languages. Hey, there are people who don't live in America. Like they sort of get an expansion in their life experience to realize that there's more than just what they see with their own eyes routinely. Then that's already a certain form of imagination. Hey, not everybody is like you are. There's a whole other world out there. Oh, of course. So the child thinks, wow, that's so amazing. And then, we get to a certain point where we're not so amazed by it, or any task that at first we tried to tackle and it's really hard, whether it's reading or driving or sewing. And then we get so good at it, we do it without a conceptual idea. So the Alter Rebbe is saying here, this is true. This idea, excuse me, this idea that what we consider to be as infinite as we can imagine, which is the thought processes and so on, is relative to Hashem. All of them, even the most profound, the deepest, is considered as tangible and as limited and a parametered. Maybe the word limited is too harsh. Parametered as a physical object, and as evidenced by the fact that Hashem says that He makes things with Chachma. So Chachma is a limited, parametered, all my good words, concept for Hashem. The Rebbe was generally opposed to having like debates, science and Torah, because you never win anything. It just becomes insulting. Maybe if you win the argument, you lose a friend because the guy's just insulted, and then there's no parameter. I mean, it's just, the thing deteriorates into a popularity contest and who could be funnier and wittier, and it doesn't really get to it. And there's no basic agreement on to what are the parameters by which we determine that something is factual or not. Additionally, the idea that there is somehow that doesn't make any sense. Well, again, that's presupposing that logic is a certain box, and whoever hits the box wins. And of course, Hashem is not containable and confinable within the box. But within all of that, there were certain people like Emmanuel Shachar, Olav Shalom, and so that the Rebbe did, because at some point you don't want to feel like you don't have some way to win in the arena of ideas. And he did engage in a few of these debates and so on with the non-Torah observant Jewish perspectives about the who's a Jew thing, with all kinds of other cultures, etc. So, I mean, just his personality fit, because he had like that. Whenever they were giving out that squishy lovey-dovey thing, I think he was absent that day. He didn't get that. He got an extra dose of rigidity and sharp-witted genius, cut your heart out and show it to you. So he would say things like, well, since you didn't go to yeshiva, you just went to Oxford, you obviously are a fool. He would have this, too bad that you didn't, apply any intelligence to something worthwhile like Torah. Instead, you were doing nuclear physics, and he would have these like jabs, which, we would go, yeah, but ultimately it just winds up being silly. But this is really the point that we're making. If we think that you're going to have some sort of box, and that's called logical, who's going to determine what that is? We sit around and agree with each other. And then you're going to hit it. This is part of the downside of this attempt to debate science versus Torah, because it's conceding that there's some thing called science, which I don't know who's in charge of that. Then they determine what is a process, and then you have to fit into their parameter, which it's not going to work, because that's not the concept. Okay. So here, the Alter Rebbe now anticipates the next question. So now that we have established that Hashem cannot be described with any parameters, even the most infinite amorphous parameter such as Chachma. So what about all the times that we refer to Hashem by all of these different descriptions? Umasha Kadosh Baruch Hu Nikra Chacham B'Kosuv. I can bring you psukim. Not just that we are imperfect and we need definitive terms and so on. So we maybe will refer to Hashem. We say, oh, Hashem is brilliant and the genius of God and wisdom and so on. But it's Torah itself refers to Hashem. V'gam Chazal. So, and it's not only that Torah does it, but the sages do it too. The scholars do it as well. So clearly, this is a good idea. It's a useful idea. And they refer, they describe Hashem as the concept of Chachma. So how does that fit with our assertion that Hashem is so infinite that you can't even describe him as being wise? Because again, that presupposes that there's this concept called wisdom, and Hashem is wise. Yaha, Na'ah, it's this whole idea. It's like, we're familiar with it socially with anti-Semitism. Jews are bad. Oh yeah, well these three Jews did good. Well those three Jews are bad. Now we're just round and round and round. It's just a slightly more mature form of Na'ah Yaha. You're going to give they give his, but you've conceded the point that it's going to somehow we're going to determine the virtue based on some external factor, and that can't be applied to Hashem. We don't validate Hashem by his meeting some objective criteria any more than we do our children. We don't say, well, my children are great because they're so kind. I'll give you kinder children. Well, my children are great because it's not some objective parameter that they meet that qualifies them as valuable. So why is it that we find in Torah that Hashem is referred to by these parameters, Chachma and kind and so on? So the Alter Rebbe explains. So again, we could go one of two ways here. One is we could say, well, it's just a metaphor. My analogy of the tortoise and the hare. That doesn't matter. Once you've mastered the concept, you don't have to go back to the fable. You got the idea. The idea is slow and steady wins the race. That's what counts. So you could say, yeah, the spheres are just training wheels, and once you're sort of matured beyond them, you can discard them. That is such a position we could take. The Alter Rebbe does not take that position. He says, no, the spheres are real. What then? How does that fit? So the Alter Rebbe emphasizes, that's because he, that is Hashem, is the Makar HaChacham. When we say that God is wise, what we mean is God is the source of wisdom. But he is not to be pinned down to the term wisdom, or to the concept wisdom, better. He is the source of wisdom. That from there Hashem dispatches and emanates, which we'll talk about that word. No one knows what it means, but it's the English word, of the very essence and fabric of the concept of Chachma, Hashem's Chachma, in the realm of Atzilus. Now, there's an important distinction here that the Alter Rebbe is underscoring here. Since Hashem is the source of everything, so why do we describe him as certain things? Why don't we say Hashem is rocks? Because he's the source of rocks. Why are we particularly pointing out, meaning the Alter Rebbe is saying, well, when we say Hashem is Chachma, or we say Hashem is Chesed, we mean that he's the source. Well, he's the source of everything. So we could say Hashem is pencils, because he's the source of pencils. So on the one hand, we do, right? We say the pencil is only a pencil because Hashem gives it existence. But why is it, or how is it that we describe Hashem specifically with certain spheres? I mean, if you say Hashem is everything, it basically doesn't have any significance because there's no parameter there. It's like, I love everybody. Okay. If I love everybody, I love nobody. It's Pirkei Avos. If I say what's mine is yours and yours is mine, it's nonsense. If I say what's mine is yours and what's yours is yours, there's distinction. I can't be kind to my right hand because it's not distinct. So to say that Hashem is the source, well, he's the source of everything. So what is the distinctive characteristic of the spheres? So the Alter Rebbe emphasizes here with the word v'netzal, that's that emanate word. The spheres are an expression of Hashem. They're not a quote, deliberate creation. When we say Hashem created the world, those are the concepts that Hashem separated out, excuse me, from him to give them greater identity. Now, we are prohibited to beseech any entity outside of Hashem, even though we recognize that this entity, like the sun or the moon, is a servant of Hashem. We are prohibited. We do, however, call upon certain aspects of Hashem. Avinu Malkeinu. Hashem forgive, Hashem heal, Hashem provide. So when we talk about the Netzal, it is the expression of Hashem, like the sun shines. That's an expression of the sun. But if I take a piece of wood and I turn it into a table, that's not an expression of my identity. That is an artistic manifestation outside of my being. So the spheres, we said Hashem is the source of the spheres. And again, we suggest, well, he's the source of everything. So again, it's like saying I love everybody. It means nothing. If I love everybody, then I love nobody because it doesn't have any meaning. So what we're describing here is indicating that word netzal, the fact that it is simply the expression of Hashem. And that expression of Hashem is distinctively aligned with the spheres. So the creations, for example, the first day Hashem creates light, that is the most detached aspect of chesed. Chesed is essentially limitless giving, and that's manifest in light, because light doesn't light up my friends more than my enemies. Light lights up everything. So the conceptual idea is the spheres, and those are the distinctive, the 3 of the intellect, the 7 of the character. Everything else is created by Hashem. And again, that's the distinctive word of netzal. It's just the expression. It's not the manifestation, meaning, I don't know if this works perfectly, but the sun shines, it's hot outside. If I'm able to harness the sun's energy and heat through solar panels, that is not an expression of the sun. That is a creation from the sun, because it requires the separate outside sort of manifestation. V'chein rachum v'chesed. Again, we describe Hashem as being compassionate. We describe Hashem as being pious or kind. Al shem shum makar rachmim v'chasadim. It means he is the source of these ideas. V'chein shar hamidos. So to all of the midos. Nimshachu v'netzolu. They are expressions mimenu from Hashem Yisbarach. Again, as we get further away from Hashem, it becomes more of a physical effort. We'll use that term. God made, and so on. Everything else. Now, how exactly this works, and what it precisely is, the process, this is known to the scholars. Now, there's a note here, which we're going to do, but I think it would be easier for us to finish the chapter and then come back to the note, because the note, it does get a little technical. So let's finish the chapter, and then we'll come back to the note. So the Alter Rebbe begins with like a disclaimer. Ein lanu asik b'nestaris. We don't have to get engaged in these matters which are otherwise hidden. You know, this is complicated stuff, and our mission here is not so much the deciphering of the process as much as it is how it impacts us. So yes, thank God there are people who study the planets. What's relevant to me is how it can impact my life and my existence. The Alter Rebbe is not dismissing it as unimportant, chas v'shalom. He's just saying we don't have to be engaged in it in order to understand the concept that we're trying to express here. What is something that we can talk about that is evident to us I mean, not evident in the sense that of obvious, but it's something that we can discuss, is lahamin amunah shleim, to have absolute amunah. And again, this is Shaar Yichud ba'amunah. And amunah doesn't just mean I believe it, like I believe that there are 12 moons that orbit Saturn, which basically means I take your word for it. But it means amunah, that I have a real familiarity with it. It's something that's truly meaningful to me, like an uman is an expert in a manner. The that Hashem and all those things that He is, again, Netzal, are all one. They're absolutely one. So the chesed of Hashem, or the fact that Hashem is the source of chesed, is absolutely one with Hashem. The Hainu midos of Shalakadosh Baruch Hu. This is what we call midos. And again, the word midos means measurables. A gallon, an hour, a mile is a midah. It's a measurable. And again, this is what we're talking about, that Hashem expresses Himself in measurables, at risk of us saying, oh, that's it, I got it. And again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we keep on coming back to that, the joint, infinite and finite. V'ritzonai, and God's will, which is the least definable. V'chachmasai, and His chachma, which is already within the characteristic of definable. It's already describable. Binasai, that much more so. V'daita, even more so. Imu husavatz musai hamarum levadei remesein katzman bekinis chachma v'seichel v'asaga, are absolutely unified with the infinity of Hashem, completely outside of our understanding. Not just that we don't understand, like the second grader doesn't understand trigonometry. It's not just that, wow, that's too hard, I can't understand that. And it's not that it's real chachma. Hashem is infinite. He aligns Himself with these characteristics all the way down until it trickles down. We use this here. The Alter Rebbe doesn't say this here, but in other places, the Alter Rebbe uses a different analogy, one that we're familiar with. We say that person is so sweet. We say that apple is so sweet. Now, on the one hand, you say, well, what does one have to do with the other? Those two are not at all. But there is a certain process where the sweetness of a kind person and the sweetness of an apple have an alignment. One is the conceptual sweetness. The other is a tangible sweetness. You could see how they're potentially in the same vertical line. Well, this idea here as well. There's the infinity of Hashem, who aligns Himself with the concept called Chachma. That is, Chachma is not higher than Hashem. Hashem doesn't have to fit into the box of Chachma, all the way down to intelligent design, all the way down to the functional processes of creation. Balachin, and therefore, Gam Yichudai Shemisyachini Midoisav Shehitzil Miito Yisbarech Gam Kain Enu Bebechinas Hasaga Lahasik. Therefore, even when Hashem manifests Himself in the Midos, His midos are not comprehensible, meaning that even when, I'll get an example, in Parshas Mishpatim, right, which is right after the Aseres HaDibros, so those are the Mishpatim, and we always talk about, you're familiar with this idea, Mishpatim are the rational laws, the obligation to return lost items, to pay your employees on time, etc., all this stuff. And then in the middle of all that, you have, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Well, that's a chok. That's a mistake. What's that doing here? Well, that's the answer. Don't make the mistake of thinking that the mishpatim are purely rational. Because again, like we talk about specifically with the mishpatim, you could learn the same laws, the same rules in a secular legal system. And yet we are obligated to only learn them from the Torah legal system and not from the secular system. So even the logic of Hashem retains that infinite characteristic of God. And therefore, Nikru midos of Shalakadosh Baruch Hu. They're still called the midos of Hashem. So again, this is a little bit overly simplified, or maybe it's a lot overly simplified. Do we create God in our image, or are we created in God's image? Meaning, do we say, well, the greatest thing is to be a genius. So God's the biggest genius. It sounds complimentary. But on the other hand, that's because we value genius. What if we value piano playing? So we say God's the greatest piano player? That would be ridiculous. Because we are then, again, committing Hashem or valuing Hashem as He fits into the box. I mean, this happens societally all the time. I mean, we know it, just an example that's dear to our hearts. People say, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Meaning, in the United States, we value democracy. So what's the greatest compliment we can pay to Israel? That it's a democracy, meaning it's created in our image. If they'll play baseball and wear blue jeans and eat hot dogs and be rude, we'll love them. Check on most of those. Because meaning the more they reflect us, the more we value them. Because we've decided that these are the virtues, Western, fair, democracy, whatever it is. I'm not disputing whether or not they are. But the conceptual idea is the more they're like me, the better they are. Well, we could potentially run into that with Hashem. We say, wow, Hashem is the best. I mean, this is Lahavdil. Again, I'm not getting too far afield. The whole Greek system. The gods are the strongest, the fastest, the smartest, the most glamorous, beautiful, whatever it may be. Meaning they are the absolute epitome of all human virtue. And that becomes their value. Let's not fall prey to that as well. Let's not fall into that bad system. So, but the spheres are real. Getting back to my analogy of analogy. This is the depth of our belief, which is amunah that is higher than seichel. So again, the greatest validation of Hashem is not how much he is like me. That is not what validates Hashem beyond anything else. Okay, now we're going to go back to the Haggah. Now this Haggah, remember all these notes means they're like in parentheses. You could, in a certain sense, take it out and still follow, but it is something that the Alter Rebbe anticipates a person may be thinking about, and therefore it adds a certain depth to the understanding. Now, it is a little technical, maybe more than a little technical. We'll do our best to sort of map it out. What the Alter Rebbe tells us here, Seid HaTzimtzum. What is the basic conceptual idea of Tzimtzum? So to review for a moment, hopefully everyone remembers the analogy of the homework. The child is doing his homework. He's getting all frustrated. He turns to his father. He says, what's the answer? So if the father is interested in being the hero, he tells the kid the answer. Oh, you're the greatest. But of course, then the kid doesn't learn anything. So what the father will do is he will gradually, gingerly move the child along until the child comes to understand the idea himself. Now, this is a risk. One is the child gets frustrated with the father. What's the answer? Just tell me. Two, the child dismisses the father. I figured it out on my own. I don't need you. Hopefully, though, the alternative is that they develop a closeness. The child realizes that the father is bringing him into his life, and they're being connected and bonded and strengthened. That's what Tzimtzum is. We get frustrated with Tzimtzum. I just want to see miracles. Come on. Why doesn't Hashem respond on my timeline? And this is where we have the trust that Hashem is working it along. Ba'or ein soif baruch hu, b'tzimtzum ak, b'soid hadikna. We're going to get to all these words. I know it's a lot of technical terms. Hopefully, we'll do our best to explain it. So, we have a basic disconnect. The disconnect is predicated on the issue that God is infinite and we are, of course, finite. So, what is the process of taking us from infinite to finite? So, we start off with the premise that God is Ein Sof. He's without end. So the first process is called Adam Kadmon. What is Adam Kadmon? Adam Kadmon translates as primordial man. Oh, well, that helps. What is primordial man? So this is, again, imagine you have an idea for a new product. So you build a prototype, meaning you're already conceptually coming up with the idea of what it's going to be like. I haven't worked out all of the nuance and detail. It's still very much part of my imagination. And the struggle or the challenge in communicating my imagination to the design team, I have to finite it. I have to define it. And the first step is I create what's called Adam Kadmon, which is the prototype of human creation. And the side of dikna. The word dikna means the beard. Now, what does that beards have to do with anything? So the key to hair, which we know Torah has a very intense relationship with hair. The Nazir has to grow his hair. The Metzora has to shave his hair. We want the beard to grow. We want the hair to be covered. Hair is, we have a lot of complexity with hair. So Chassidus explains that one of the things that we find by hair is, on the one hand, you cut it, there's no pain. God forbid, you get a paper cut, that's it. call in the jaws of life. But I cut hair routinely, and there's no pain, there's no sensitivity. I just boom, cut it, and it's fine. On the other hand, and again, this is a modern illustration, DNA, you get a hair, it's got the guy's whole life in there. And especially we talk about, it comes from the brain and so on. So on the one hand, its godliness is very tzimtzumed. Its life is very tzimtzum, so much so if you cut it, you don't even feel it. On the other hand, it's just like all of tzimtzum. The key to tzimtzum is not to dumb it down. The key to tzimtzum is to frame the most intense concepts of godliness into the most finite formats of illustration. So we got Adam Kadmon, which isn't even yet the actual pragmatic mousetrap. It's just the prototype. And you got this idea of Soid, the conceptual idea of the beard, which is something that's so tzimtzumed, it has no natural sensitivity. And yet it still contains the same intense infinity of the original imagination, like Adam Kadmon, like that primordial man. Shetzoid kol hatzimtzumim. What is the whole objective of all of tzimtzum? Litzamtzem haor sheyislav shebechilas kelim de yutzviris. V'hine achish neslabish or insoit bebechinas kelim de chabad. Ashayich levim ashakasav haramam hu yedei bu amadav hu yedua uvidias atzma v'chul. So the goal of all of tzimtzum, just like in the homework analogy from Rabbi Friedman, the goal of all of tzimtzum is to take the most conceptual, subtle, profound idea and embed it in the most tangible concepts that can be absorbed within the recipient and not lose that essential idea, that infinite idea. Once you've done that, now we can apply, and you recognize this from way back when, the Rambam's point that God is the knower, the knowledge, and the known. Hopefully this is familiar to everybody. Now this upset some, the Kabbalists, who said, you can't say God is, you can't say he's the knower, the knowledge, and the known. You're putting a limit on Hashem. But the Rambam says, yeah, I'm only talking about it on this side of it, meaning, as we know, every story, meaning why did you have a blueberry muffin this morning? To really understand that, you have to go back to creation. Because, but you got to pick a place to start. It's the old joke. What's the name, the definition of a nudnik? Someone, you ask him how he's doing, and he tells you. Meaning, I don't need your whole life story. It's not only my life story. I have to give you my parents' life story. And I have to give you I have to go back. Every story must begin at Bereshis. Because how else could I understand why I live in where I live or I do what I do if I don't understand everything? But we can't do that. It's not functional. So when the Rambam says that God is the knower, the knowledge, and the known, he's referring to after Hashem has already decided to invest himself in this vehicle to thus express the infinite idea within the finite of the human being. Lefi shebechinas kelim datzilis. Nasa neshama v'chayis l'biyah. So as it goes down in this process, again, think about it in the manufacturing analogy. You have an idea, then you build a prototype. Now you are absolutely clear on your idea, and you're trying to explain this to the engineering team who has to build it, or to the venture capitalists who are going to invest in it. You have to come up with a process that you can express the infinity of your idea to the audience so that they will grasp it and be able to physically build it. So the first thing is you need some kalim, you need some order. You can't just have laughter or cheering. You have to have some precision. So that begins in the process of chacham. So those kalim, those tools, become what drives all the other levels. And all that's within them. If you're not going to have any tzimtzum, you can't start describing Hashem in his essence as knower and knowledge and known. I mean, here's a visual example. So I say, what is this? This is a pen, but that's not really true because now it's a scratcher, and now it's a doorstop. So what is this? The only thing you can say this is this. You got that? I don't know if you can see. This is the meaning. It's this that if I drop it from this angle with this onto this surface, it makes this noise. That's it. This is this. But when you say, do you have a pen? Here's a pen. So a pen is a very defined, but it's this with when the Rambam is describing Hashem as in these terms of knower, knowledge, and known, he is describing Hashem after he has started to invest himself. So we have an interesting halachic example. We know that in the laws of Tumah, something is only subjective to Tumah once it is a usable item. So a raw sheet of cotton is not a usable item, and therefore, if it comes in contact with Tumah, it's not Tumah. So the question is, at what point does it become usable? Well, you know what? It depends on me. It depends on the owner. If I'm going to make this cotton into a shirt, so it only becomes susceptible to Tumah once it's a shirt. What if I'm going to use it to be a towel or a blanket? Well, then it's already. Meaning it's the same physical item, but I transform its identity based on my authority over it. Similarly, when Rambam describes Hashem as being knower, knowledge, and known, which tickled some people, the Alter Rebbe is explaining that the Rambam meant this post the original Tzimtzum, that's where the Tzimtzum begins. But it's not the essence of Hashem. Just like ourselves, we describe ourselves as parent, we describe ourselves as friend, we describe ourselves by our profession, we describe ourselves by our hobbies, but that's not me. But it's not wrong to say this is a dentist. That's not wrong. It's just one aspect of his character. So Hashem, again, is beyond. Hashem is not, but he associates, like we say in the davening, L'cha Hashem Hagedula. He associates with these matters, not that he is. He is beyond even this characteristic called Chachma. To the point that when we're describing Hashem as Chachma, it's like describing the person as the table maker. That's not his identity. That's what he does. That's not who he is. Perhaps another one of my analogies, maybe it'll work, maybe not. In literature, and we find it lahavdil even in Torah, the king of Denmark would be called Denmark. Why? Because the entirety of the kingdom is the product of the king. So he is not just a guy that there's a country called Denmark. And you put this guy, he's elected the king of Denmark, so now he's the king. And tomorrow someone else will be the king. You know, your dentist will retire. You'll get another dentist. Your dentist will retire. You'll get another dentist. The king will retire. You'll get another king. No, the point is that the king, or we would say like a Rebbe, he is the entirety of the community. So the community is the byproduct of the king. Without the king, there is no community. There is no Denmark. I don't know if it works, but this is the conceptual idea. The infinity of Hashem. Now, once we talk about infinity, we say, oh, infinity, that's great. What is that? I don't know. Then we move on. So now we got to make infinity somewhat accessible. So we say infinity begins to express itself through the spheres, which are real. And the first stop is the most intangible of all of the spheres, which is the characteristic of Chachma. So within that, you can describe Hashem's Chachma as being different than human Chachma, and then it trickles all the way down, like the conceptual idea, to the prototype, to the explanation, to the design, to the redesign, until you've developed it and you're selling it at Walmart. All of those processes retain that infinite characteristic. So the spheres are real within what Hashem decides to align himself with. And the spheres are distinctive from every other creation in that they are the expression of Hashem in contrast to the design, which is trickled down that much further along in the process. All right. Have a good week, everybody. Yes.
Sure. Would it be, and this is really, really simplifying this, but it would be sort of like once there's the object, the thing, this, it's kind of confined, it creates that kalim, but then it's the purpose of what it's given that then could express the infinity.
Absolutely. I mean, this is essentially, and again, this is something that we're familiar with socially. In the world of Torah, there's of course multiple derech and perspective, but one point that really Chabad and the rest of the Torah world have a little bit of a different philosophy on is what is the essential method through which we connect with Hashem? Is it through getting outside of this world by elevating ourselves in Torah? Or is it by bringing God into this physical world through the performance of mitzvahs? Now, of course, everybody agrees you need both, but there's a priority struggle here. So we have the quote, Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The study of Torah surpasses them all. So there is that philosophy that says, if we had the opportunity, we'd all just sit and study Torah all day. Well, we don't have that opportunity either because we got to pay the bills or because I just don't have that kind of mind space. I don't have that kind of discipline. So I got to go out into the world. The other is the primary, again, not to the exclusion of the primary is to make this physical world the godly place. Because every time we interact with the pencil and we utilize it in the service of Hashem, we evoke the infinity that's in the pencil at a more intense, profound level, even than the infinite godliness that's in the conceptual idea of Torah study. So when we interact with anything of this physical world, we have to really ask ourselves this fundamental question. Why am I doing this? So when people say, well, how could you eat animals and so on? Well, there's a certain conceptual point, right? Why? And our answer should be because the animal has no capacity to be anything more than an animal. But I have the capacity, if I will use the energy from eating the animal to then do mitzvahs, I am actually elevating the animal and the pencil and so on, which is one of the reasons why we have such a prohibition against waste. Because when I waste things, I'm saying, well, there's no godliness here. I throw it out. What do you mean? How can it exist if there's no godliness in it? So very much so. When we interact with it, that's our opportunity to release its infinite godliness. All right.
Thank you.
Have a
That's
good
great.
week, everybody. See you next Davach.